Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por venir. Tenemos hoy el lujo que nos estamos dando en Eseade. La verdad que yo les agradezco a todos por estar acá. Muchos están conociendo las nuevas instalaciones de Eseade. Eseade está en un proceso de cambio, en el que ese proceso de cambio busca, por un lado, fortalecer y redescubrir ese espíritu tradicional, austríaco, que nos ha dado tanto prestigio, y a la vez encontrar una nueva forma de comunicar, una mejor manera de llegar a nuestro público y obviamente actualizar un poco nuestra oferta de servicios, porque a la larga el secreto de tener un buen producto es que el mercado lo demande, ¿no? Así que también adaptarnos un poco a esas necesidades que tiene el mercado, que son los alumnos, los profesionales del futuro. Así que muy contentos con eso, les agradezco nuevamente. Y obviamente un gran gracias a la Fundación Libertad que ha hecho el esfuerzo de invitar a la Argentina a una intelectual, académica, profesional destacadísima, con un prestigio intachable, como es DEIRDRE MCCLOSKEY, y que generosamente Alejandro y la Fundación han trabajado con nosotros para que esto hoy sea posible. Así que solamente decir eso y presentar a quienes nos acompañan acá. Rafael Beltramino, acá cerquita mío, es profesor de Epistemología e Historia de la Economía en la Universidad del Centro Educativo Latinoamericano, en Rosario, la UCEL. Tiene amplia experiencia en la historia y doctrinas que han conformado y conforman el entorno económico de nuestros días, y en varias ocasiones ha escrito artículos sobre economía. Entre ellos, ¿es el mercado neutral en términos morales? Rafael también es experto en epistemología y filosofía de las ciencias, y ha leído la obra de McCloskey. Así que muchas gracias, Rafael, por estar acá con nosotros. Tenemos a Martín Krause. Martín Krause es profesor de Historia del Pensamiento Económico en la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas de la Universidad de Buenos Aires y de Economía en la Facultad de Derecho de la misma universidad. Tiene publicados varios libros, entre ellos La economía explicada a mis hijos, En defensa de los más necesitados y Democracia directa, junto con Margarita Molteni. ¿Es así? Se ha desempeñado como rector de esta casa, al igual que Carlos Newland, que está acá presente, y tiene numerosos artículos en revistas académicas. Por último, presento a nuestra principal oradora, DEIRDRE MCCLOSKEY, doctora en Economía por la Universidad de Harvard, profesora en la Universidad de Chicago durante 1968 y hasta el año 1980. Entre el 2000 y el año 2015 enseñó Economía, Historia e Inglés en la Universidad de Illinois, en Chicago. Es economista, historiadora, tiene 11 títulos honorarios de distintas universidades estadounidenses y europeas, ha escrito 19 libros y alrededor de 400 artículos académicos y populares sobre temas que van desde la economía técnica, la teoría estadística, la defensa de las personas transgénero y las virtudes burguesas, la obra principalmente sobre la cual vamos a discutir hoy. A veces se la considera como una conservative economist, se le dice que es conservadora, pero ella dice que no. Se define como una mujer literaria, cuantitativa, posmoderna, pro libre mercado, progresista episcopalista, ex-marxista, del medio oeste de Boston, que alguna vez fue hombre, y no es conservadora, sino liberal clásica y cristiana. Así que bueno, muchas gracias a todos y queda abierto.
Thank you very much. I mean, after all this display of scholarly excellence, they can speak my language, I can't speak theirs. So we'll have to do this in English. I'm sorry to say. I'm so ashamed of this. I told a joke last night that I love, and I'm gonna tell the joke again. Someone who knows 3 languages is called trilingual. Someone who knows 2 is called bilingual. Someone who knows only 1 is called una gringa. And alas, that's me. So we had some discussion about it, and I think it'll be interesting to talk about the role of ethics in the enrichment of the world. And I think we need to start with a number. In Argentina, as much as in the United States or Australia or Brazil, and lots of other places. Real income, the ability to purchase goods and services for the average person from the very, and especially in my feeling, the poorest, has increased since 1800 by, now hear this, 3,000%. Now it could be 2,000% and still be amazing. And you can make a case that it's actually higher than a factor of 30, about 3,000%, because the quality of goods has improved. The quality of glass, that glass couldn't have been made in 1945. The glass technology has enormously improved. Containerization. As I flew into town here, you see the port, you see hundreds and hundreds of containers lined up to coming off a ship. That was invented in 1956 in North Carolina. And the modern university, combining teaching and research, is an invention of von Humboldt, a great hero of liberalism in 1810 in the University of Berlin. So there's been this amazing improvement in organization, in biology. I mean, look, I have 2 hip joint replacements that couldn't have been done for my grandmother, or especially my great-grandmother. This is an amazing change, and it's unique to the modern world. And for all the sort of sad tale of Argentina was once among the richest countries in the world and is now not, and woe is me, and populism and Juan Perón and all that, Evita. Nonetheless, Argentina has shared in it, as you can see by looking around at this room. You're all, I've said this last night, I'll say it again. Everyone here, I take it, I assume, is a descendant of a peasant, of an extremely poor person who could not read, lived on average to age 30, couldn't travel, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this is an amazing change. As Adam Smith said, we should be concerned in economics, not only, but especially the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. But it seems to me that Smith made a mistake. He focused on capital accumulation, which is necessary. Come on, you got to build the building and build the mines, human capital formation. Yeah, what's between your ears is probably the most important form of capital in the modern world by far. Once our ancestors had their hands and their backs, and thank you, dear, and the bosses had the land and the factories. In 1848, that was a sensible account. Still, Thomas Piketty thinks it's still a sensible account as a kind of Marxist. And it's not. But either form of capital, either physical capital or human capital, is not as I said last night, is not the spring in the watch. It's the gears, it's necessary, But an infinite number of things are necessary. I don't know, oxygen in the air is necessary for economic growth. Well, would you have an oxygen theory of economic growth? Obviously, that doesn't make much sense. Good enforcement of property rights is essential for economic growth. If you have an active civil war going on where people are stealing from each other, as Thomas Hobbes, the great English philosopher, said, we'll end with a war of all against all. And the life of man will be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And that's true enough. So property rights are necessary. But the trouble with these numerous necessary items, capital accumulation, rule of law, and so forth, is that many other societies have had them in history, and they don't get this extraordinary 3,000% increase. In 1492, if you could bet which society would have a factor of 30 increase eventually, I mean, no one believed this, but if you could have done it, if you imagined that was possible, you would bet on China. Because China at the time had very good enforcement of law. By comparison, the chaos in Europe had extremely good transportation system. The Grand Canal, a great investment project, had peace for centuries at a time, whereas the Europeans have only recently stopped killing each other on massive and frequent occasions. So it can't be those necessary things. There must be something else. And what I would claim in brief is, and I'll be brief in this presentation because I want to hear from my colleagues, is an ethical change in northwestern Europe, starting in Holland in the 1600s and passing to England around 1700 and to Scotland in the Scottish Enlightenment that we all admire so much later in the century, and at more or less the same time to the English colonies in North America, especially in New England. And the change, in a word, was liberalism. The idea that we're all equal in dignity, not equal in outcome. That's the French Enlightenment. That's Rousseau. But no, Adam Smith. Equality, and I would express it, I'm starting to think that maybe this is the best word for it. Equality of permission. No slaves. Adam Smith, for example, was quite hostile to slavery at a time when most people in the world thought, well, it's a misfortune if you become a slave, but, they're not against the system of slavery, whereas Adam Smith was. And indeed, Quaker merchants, English merchants, came to be against slavery, having participated vigorously in the slave trade. The most famous case is John Newton, the author of that song, that hymn. That's right, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. So in short, what I'm claiming is that there was an ethical change that made the modern world. Now, let's get clear here. This is not a restatement of Max Weber's great book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, in 1905. If you haven't read Max Weber, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, stop what you're doing and read it, because it's a great book, but it's wrong. It's wrong in the theology, and it's wrong in the economic history. My argument is not about the psychology of the individual entrepreneur. And I think it's been a big mistake. I just wrote an essay on Schumpeter, which is going to appear in the Review of Austrian Economics, where I make this point that Schumpeter fell into this idea that it's a psychological change. But look, I think all societies have entrepreneur potential. All societies have people who are willing to go against the conventions, 5% maybe. What matters and what changed in the 1700s in England and northwestern Europe is the audience for it, so to speak. The rest of the society came to admire innovation in a way they really had not before, and to admire business, merchants, in a way they had not before. Oddly, especially Christianity. Christianity is unusually hostile to commerce by the standards of Hindus or Muslims. You know, Muhammad was a merchant. And they have no problem with this. Merchants are okay in Islam. Let's let this happen. So that's the claim I'm making. That for reasons we can go into, more or less by accident, it's not that there's some deep European superiority, that having a problem with melanin in your skin does not make you better at commerce or something. That's not the argument. The argument is that there was an ideological change, an ethical change. Instead of viewing the bourgeoisie, say, the middle class, with contempt, the only way to honor in European society was the military or the church. There came to be a route to honor through commerce. And that was because people changed their mind about it. Let me just end with this. I take the contrast between Shakespeare and Jane Austen. Of course, I love Shakespeare, everyone does, but I also love Jane Austen. Jane Austen, the great novelist, circa 1800, 1810. Shakespeare, circa 1600, 1610. The change in attitudes towards the middle class between those two authors is quite sharp. Even though Shakespeare was the son of a glover, and therefore presumptively lower middle class, and was a successful manager of stage companies, that was his business, and ended his career rich. He wanted to be a noble. He wanted to be a member of the gentry. And he, in fact, commissioned a fake emblem of his family. Whereas Jane, who was not a member of the bourgeoisie, she was a member of the lower gentry. Her father was a priest in the Church of England. Her brother, one of her brothers, became a priest in the Church of England. Every one of her suitors, she didn't ever marry, but she had suitors, was a priest in the Church of England. rural gentry. That's what they were. Nonetheless, she was amiable, one of her favorite words, towards merchants in town. One of the heroes, quasi-heroes, one of the minor heroes of one of her books is a farmer with a flock of sheep, which is the rural equivalent of a person in business in the town. And it changed, it was transformed. And that made the modern world. Because it made it possible for the woman who wants to open a hairdressing salon in the neighborhood, she was able to do it. It made the great inventors possible to have a go. And it was the key is it's very widespread. It's not just a bunch of elite folk. My friend Joe Mokir and I are very close on this, but Joe tends to emphasize the elite engineers. They were important. But it's the widespread character of this ethical change that made the modern world. And let me just end with Argentina. It's the, what would you call it? The falling away from that ideology and that ethic that's kept Argentina from becoming the world-renowned rich country that it could so easily be. Thank you.
Well, I only have questions for you.
Let's have it.
And my questions relate to your view on other theories that try to explain this same
That's
phenomenon.
this book.
Yes. The first one is Murray Rothbard. He argues that it all started not in Protestant Northern Europe, but in Catholic Italy, in Venice and Florence.
Yeah.
So what is your view about
Well, I'm a great admirer of Venice and Florence. I mean, honestly, they're wonderful. But that's it's not in northern Italy that the modern enrichment began. And a wonderful example of this, of why it didn't begin there, is the history in Florence of the Medici. Mm-hmm. As their name implies, they started as doctors. And then they became bankers. And in their great period, they were bestrode the capital markets of Europe. They were buying wool from England. There is concrete evidence of Florentine merchants in England buying wool in the 15th century and the 16th. Okay.
You have Lombard Street.
You have Lombard Street, exactly. The Lombardi. Indeed, in Venice, there's the villa of the Germans. And so there was a lot of this entrepreneurship going on, but they became the dukes. Just exactly against the principle of being bourgeois and continuing to develop. It's actually very surprising that Italy was not the center, because it had everything. It had science, Galileo among others, not the only one, but Galileo. It had merchant connections all over the world, not the world, but all over the Mediterranean. So there's something missing.
In the book, you argue that this reevaluation of commerce and the ethics of commerce comes for 2 or 4 R's.
Yeah.
Reform, revolution, revolt, and reading.
Reading, yeah.
Can you explain that?
Well, it's kind of a cutie thing to have the 4 R's, and I don't want to get too carried away with the exactitude of that. But it is clear that in the centuries after after the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, which is 1517, there's a series of accidental successes for ordinary people in Europe. And so ordinary people get the idea, which they don't get in China. Come on, the emperor is in charge, shut up. Or Japan, same thing, or the Mughal Empire in northern India, or the Ottoman Empire with strict hierarchies and so on and so forth. Even all four of those societies were highly commercial. So it's not just commerce that does it. They got the idea of equality, of equality of permission. Now let's take the first one, just of these R's, which is the Protestant Reformation. And Max Weber, who I've told you I admire very much, nonetheless thought it was the doctrine of the Protestants that was the key. And I don't think so. I think it was the church organization that changed. As Luther said, the priesthood of all believers. Then in 1525, when the peasants in Germany revolted, I said, no, wait a second, I didn't quite mean that. And the Lutheran Church continued to have a hierarchy of priests and bishops. But the radical Reformation, the Anabaptists and completely crazy small groups, most extreme of which is long after the 1640s in England, the Quakers, chose their own ministers, and in the case of the Quakers, didn't have any ministers. Right? We could have a Quaker meeting right now, sit and wait for the Holy Spirit to descend, and then people would speak up. Even women were equal among what they called themselves the Society of Friends, the Quakers. So you can kind of see that it was successful because of reading, because of the printing press invented in China, and it made people bold.
So what they have in common is that they empowered the ordinary people.
Ordinary people. It's not the elite. You know, Ashimoglu, Darren Ashimoglu, a very brilliant economist, and his friend James Robinson followed Douglas North and Barry Weingast in saying that it's the elites changing their mind that's key here. And maybe, but what's more important is that ordinary people started to feel bold. Okay. And there's a lot of evidence for that. It's not just that I'm making it up.
Second theory, and you mentioned Douglas North. But I would ask you for two Douglas North. The young North emphasizes changes in relative prices, changes in population.
That's exactly
the
right.
older North it goes to ideas. And so my question is, what's your view on the young North first, and how close came to you the old North?
Well, the young North I gave a Nobel Prize to. Mm-hmm. I was the person asked by the Swedish Academy to write the citation for North and Fogel. And they proposed to give it instead to Fernand Braudel, and I killed that idea. No, I wrote the citation. It has my prose in it. Not, that they revised it, but my prose. I was asked to evaluate the possible prizes. It was for the invention of pleometrics, not for his new institutionalist work.
I see.
Okay, now how about his new institutionalist work? Well, partly they have this, what they regard as this material explanation. Weingast, and I've had debates with him, and with Doug Norris, who's an old friend, and Ashimoglu and Robinson I haven't debated with them, but I've written on them. And the basic problem is that they have no theory of ideas. They have no acquaintance with ideas much. It's a harsh and kind of smart aleck judgment on my part, but Doug North's book, when was it, 2005 or something, his last book by himself,
Understanding the process.
the process, I say, is the worst academic book I've read in 30 years. And the reason it's the worst is not because he emphasizes ideas as he does, but he has nothing to say about them. He says, ideas, 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 that's what changed. Then he says, now let's see, how could we study ideas, human action, as you and we were saying before. How can we do this? Oh, let's see. Let's go to the brain scientists. He says this over and over again. We're going to go to the brain scientists, the people who put electrodes on your head and measure the flow of blood to various parts of the brain. And that'll tell us about ideas. When we have right in front of us, up in your library, we have an instrument called reading that tells you what people were thinking. They lie, they misunderstand themselves, it happens, but it's there. You can recover what Adam Smith thought. I know it sounds shocking, but you don't need a brain scientist to find that out. And he's utterly disdainful of the humanities. So I find this remarkable, and I complained about it to him at the time, and that had no effect.
It's another kind of reductionism.
It is.
That I think you are very keen in signaling in economics. That economists also always look for material answers.
They do, because
Only for material
because
answers.
we're all Marxists today. That's what's so peculiar. Even conservative historians,
Yes.
Trevor Roper, for example, wrote a book on Archbishop Laud, Charles I's instrument, against the Puritans in the 1620s and 30s. On page 3, he says, well, politics, I'm going to talk about theology and so on, opinions, ideas. But, politics is mainly about interest, financial interests. You don't know on page 3. You got to look into it. So there's an odd sense in the past 130 years of history, Marxism, even though it fails in detail, won the battle.
Third theory. Size of jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Some argue that it all started in Europe and not in China because China was a centralized empire, but Europe was a constellation of very small jurisdictions, and then therefore there was this institutional competition.
I think that's true. And I have, in volume 3, I have 3 books here. I have Bourgeois Virtues, Bourgeois Dignity, which is mainly about economics, and Bourgeois Equality. And I talk a lot about precisely that in the 3rd volume.
Okay, so
And it makes sense. I mean, it's obvious that take the case of Columbus. He proposed his project to many different courts. And he went twice to the Spanish court, and in the second time, you should all take that as a lesson in applying for scholarships and so on. Keep trying. Whereas if you got turned down by the emperor of China, that was it. You were finished, and you might be finished in other ways. By the way, under the Qing especially. They had strong censorship. There was a man in the 1700s in China who printed the name of the emperor, which was against the law. Not the name, the character for the emperor. For this, he was executed, and his entire family was sold into slavery. Now, there were individual countries and princedoms that did that in Europe, but then you could always move.
But then that means that you're not ascribing only one cause to these, but because you're accepting two already.
Well, two, that's right, except that, here, let's express it this way. Liberalism was unique to Europe. Overlapping polities was not unique. In India, even under the Mughal Empire, didn't include all of India. There were many competing, especially in the south, many competing polities. In the Arab world, after this kind of original conquests, there were competing polities. The Caliphate of Baghdad and the Caliphate of this, that, and the other. Not as much as there was in Europe, I agree. So I would say that it looks like, if competing polities were enough, well, actually, a very good example of competing polities was the Greek world, which indeed flourished in this extraordinary way in the 5th century and in the 4th century too, precisely because people could move around. Aristotle was not an Athenian, yet he founded a school in Athens. I've walked in the very place. So yeah, that's right. So you might even say it's necessary. I don't know. I agree. But I'm not a dogmatist. I don't insist. Liberalism. What would I say? There's got to be some mechanism to make new ideas flourish. And it can be competition, like in art and painting, or it can be the liberal idea. This is an opportunity for detailed empirical work. The most fragmented place in Europe was Germany, until the formation of the German Empire. And to go back to Italy, Italy was also fragmented. And indeed, people kept moving around. Machiavelli, for example, got exiled from Florence. So they're moving around, but it didn't do anything. It was this comparatively unified polity of England that eventually did it.
I think the concept is the one that you introduced in the book. It's trade-tested progress. I think that's the key concept. It's a progress tested by trade.
That's right. That's right. And but indeed, that was one of the problems that Europe had. They have tariffs all over the place, protection, mercantilism laid on in all directions. So to go back to this very important question you're asking, maybe what's crucial about liberalism is precisely that it releases Europe from the grip of monopoly. Sheila Ogilvy has done a very good book, just came out, on a comprehensive study of European guilds. And contrary to a line which some economic historians have been proposing for quite a while, that guilds were very nice and they were producers of human capital, and they're kind of little schools that produce skilled people. She says, what are you talking about? They're monopolies, dear. Come on. And they were vicious monopolies, oppressing the working class and hurting the consumers at the same time. And now, again, this is good, because I have never quite thought of this. It's the liberal idea that breaks them down. I mean, famously, when Napoleon's armies, and although he was a jerk in many ways, he was the carrier of the French Revolution in Europe. And when his armies conquered places, the first thing they did is abolish guilds. They abolished licenses to get into occupations, such as now in Argentina and the United States, we've come back to a guild arrangement.
Inspired by your work, I'm an economic historian, and with my colleague from Hungary, Eseade, we've been working now to create an index of capitalist mentality using the World Value Survey. He's an econometrician, I'm an economic historian.
That's good.
So we make an index which appeared in the last Fraser report as a chapter, and it ranks the nations from most pro-capitalist to Argentina's perhaps in the last place, US in the first place. But then we look at conglomerates of nations.
Yes.
So it fits in with your books. The most pro-capitalist region in the world is the Anglosphere, United States. Second is Northern Europe.
Scandinavia,
Yes.
which people are always calling socialist and really isn't.
And third, the Sinosphere, the Chinese culture countries.
And they've always been that way.
Yeah. So I'm doing some work now. I'm trying to understand what these three regions have in common. They don't have in common religion or culture in general. But after looking a lot, they had in common is a very big proportion of their agricultural sector, which were independent farmers.
Yes.
In the yellow countries, let's say, it's rice that does this, it has low economies of scale. All Northern Europe has a big proportion of its population dependent. When I'm speaking a big proportion, maybe 50% of their farm labor force, and in US also. And the idea, stealing an idea from Hayek, which says that your ideology reflects the way you do things and the way you interact in the market, your economic ideology. What would explain why these countries are naturally pro-capitalist is their rural origins of small independent businessmen. I'd like you to...
That sounds extremely plausible for a lot of cases. It's certainly true of the United States. I mean, if the United States had been Virginia alone, I doubt we would have gotten a liberal revolution, although many of the leaders of the revolution, Washington and Jefferson and so on, the man who wrote "All men and women, dear, are created equal," owned slaves to the end of his life, didn't free them on his death, as Washington did, enslaved his dead wife's sister, not making this up, half-sister, and his own children by her. So, whereas in New England, they came, of course, to be fiercely opposed to slavery. Immediately what occurs to a British economic historian is that it doesn't fit Britain.
I have an answer.
Let's hear it.
Because it had the original, perhaps in the 16th century, 17th century, more of a dependent farmer.
We did.
Getting closer.
That's true.
But the difference in England is it has a very big secondary and tertiary sector.
That's for
and
sure.
As you look at the census, who is there? Half the people there are independent artisans, traders, have carts, whatever. So you have the similar proportion as to Northern
It's
Europe.
true. It's true. So you might want to, and in the argument, you might want to introduce then this other component and see whether it also works in other places. Because I think you're right. Schumpeter pointed this out, that the small independent proprietor outside of agriculture is crucial to a liberal democracy. He believed that was doomed in 1942. He said it's hopeless. We're going to have centralized state socialism and great laboratories and the big corporations will be all there is. And that proved not to be so, thank God. But you're right. There's this artisan class. But of course, then we go back to Italy, and it's an artisan class. Then you have to act. Now, in the south of Italy, clearly you're right. Small artisan class, big farms with a sort of proletariat. It's well worth exploring this in
Actually,
detail.
I've been trying to measure that proportion, give it a number for 1800 in the whole world. And the problem is there's not very good census. Something that doesn't fit the model
I know.
is a bit the Mediterranean, where you have some more proportion of farmers.
That's right. I mean,
or small,
full.
but the picture of the world is you have a free agriculture, active economic ages.
Well, indeed.
The regions we said, and the rest feudalism,
But
slavery.
in line with your argument, Attica, Athens, has a lot of small proprietors and small merchants and craftsmen. It also has slavery, though, of course. But I don't think that's a knockdown argument. I think you're right. There's a kind of a crazy liberalism within the free people in Athens that we call the birth of democracy.
You mentioned that you believe that there are always in every society some percentage of entrepreneurs. You said 5%. The key that happened in Northern Europe was the attitude of society.
I looked up 5%.
Since I believe that we have a problem here in Argentina with that, particularly in Argentina, perhaps because you can find different attitudes in Chile, Peru, Colombia, neighboring countries, and I think that may be a really deep problem for us. No?
Well, as he said, that Argentina comes very low in its evaluation of the innovators.
Well, it wasn't like that in that
I know.
famous period now between 1870 and 1930. Maybe it was not that. And now we have replaced that sort of admiration for people that make money by resentment. That's basically what is almost generalized here. But you mentioned that in Europe that happened almost by accident, if I understood you well.
Yeah.
Did you make any theories about how could that attitude may emerge or could be recovered?
Well, it's somewhat mysterious to me. To sort of come back to a more material-based explanation, liberalism was successful in northwestern Europe and in northern Italy. That's the trouble. But anyway, northwestern Europe, it's quite plain in the 1600s that Holland, little Holland, which had fought for 80 years against the hegemon of Spain, by far the best generals and soldiers in the world, and had won, they succeeded economically. And Holland was the wonder of Europe in the late 17th century. And the English, who had fought 3 wars against them, trying to take their trade away from them, finally said, oh, to hell with it, we'll become Dutch. They got a Dutch king, they got a Dutch exchange, they got a Dutch national debt. It's surprising they didn't adopt the Dutch language. And there's this strange sense in which England becomes Dutch around 1700. Let's see, I've sort of lost track of the argument. Remind me again what we're talking about?
No, the attitudes.
Yeah. So the attitudes change, and they could have not changed In France, they didn't change. Yet France had to compete with Britain, so to speak, and fought essentially another 100 years war from the 1690s under the leadership of Willem, now the King of England, right through 1815. The long 18th century was a more or less continuous war between France and England. And the French kept trying to, as a matter of fact, French ideas and the elite ideas were often highly liberal. And Adam Smith learned a lot from the French, from the physiocrats. But I think if you can imagine a world without Britain, France would not have become a liberal country.
We're not.
Would not have become.
Yes, thank you very much for your nice beginning. And I understood that according to your view, the world changed because of the way people was analyzing merchant processes, ideas,
Yes.
right? But you are not. Just I would like for you to go deeper on that. And why did those ideas change? Because at least. I didn't have the chance to read your books. I will, promise.
Oh, you must. I'm
Yeah,
shocked that you haven't read them all.
It was not because of the rebirth of reason. One of the reasons Aquinas rediscovering Aristotle and challenging medieval views and mysticism, and challenging that idea of what is important is life after death instead of life right now. You didn't mention Descartes or John Locke or Francis Bacon, or that idea of the discovery of the scientific method. I don't know. I think that Europe in general.
Now look, as you said, you haven't read my books, so you don't know what I haven't mentioned.
Oh yeah.
And I have a great
Please,
deal.
could you elaborate a little bit on that?
I have a great deal on Aquinas. He's my main man. I love Aquinas.
Oh, I see.
And because he was made dogma in the Catholic Church by Innocent III, alas, professional philosophers tend to ignore Aquinas, which is crazy. He was an excellent philosopher. And he was an excellent social philosopher, as you're pointing out. And you're right. I think it's a mistake to overemphasize the 17th century scientific revolution. It's a cliche in the study of medieval science, and I can name the people who say this. It's a correct cliche. Some cliches are wrong. This is correct. That indeed, as you suggest, the elevation of reason comes in people like Aquinas or Albert the Great, his teacher, and indeed, as you know, the school of Salamanca in the 16th century is advocating Adam Smithian type stuff a couple of hundred years before Adam Smith. So I agree there's a medieval background to this. I do think, so there's a reason-based, what would we call it, technology and science idea in Europe. But there's also one in China. So I don't want to get too excited. I express it this way. I think to get Europe right, we've got to know China better than we usually do. Not that I'm a big expert on China, but the great work that's gone on in the history of Chinese science and mathematics has shown that it's comparable to Europe Here's an easy index. We speak of the great universities in Europe, Bologna, Paris, Oxford. Well, there was the equivalent in China. Indeed, there was the equivalent earlier in the Arab world. We Europeans got the idea of the university as the idea of Aristotle as the great rational figure from the Arabs. We didn't just come up with it ourselves as though we were all there in the 12th century. But the Chinese examination system, which only ended in 1911, had more graduates in the Middle Ages than the European universities. Now, admittedly, they weren't emphasizing theology, and they weren't emphasizing this kind of logic that Aquinas stressed. So I'm well aware of this, and I give honor to the scientific revolution too. But I think it's much too simple to say the scientific revolution caused the modern world. Bacon, for example, was a sneering aristocrat and wanted to organize science centrally. He became the Lord Chancellor of England, rather similar to our current Attorney General, who's a corrupt man in the United States, and he was convicted of selling legal decisions to both sides. So I'm not a big fan of Bacon.
Deirdre, if this is okay with you, I would like to ask you 2 questions, but on a different topic from the one
Sure.
we have been, but topics that you have covered and which are a bit more.
I've covered every
from
topic.
today. Okay, well, that's great.
Ask me anything. I can advise you on your love life.
Great, it's great to open that. Okay.
I know everything. I cover all. I don't. Really, I don't. I don't even speak French, for God's sakes.
So my 2 questions are, the first one is, many people can be sympathetic to the view about capitalism creating a lot of wealth, but now the discussion is about the distribution of wealth. It's unfair, etc. So I would like your take on that.
Well, let me answer that. Let's get organized,
Great.
then you can have the next one. I have this long review. I was kind of forced to do this because I don't really think the income distribution is very interesting. I never have. But I was asked by a journal to do a review of Thomas Piketty's book. That became such a fashion among in the left in the world. And it's a serious book. He's not a fool and he's hardworking and so on. But he's wrong from beginning to end. And you can read the review. I got carried away. I think they thought I was going to do a 2-page review. I did 50 pages in their journal. I took over the entire journal, 1 issue, and I'm attacking Piketty on all kinds of grounds. I didn't look at what other economists and economic historians have said about his book, because I didn't want to pile on. He had done a serious book, and I should give it an independent reading, so I did. I still, to this day, I'm somewhat unclear what other economists have said, but I kind of hear the rumor that they don't like it either. From a technical point of view, one massive technical problem with the book is that he ignores human capital, as I mentioned. And human capital is the source of much of the income in the modern world. I mean, just in an accounting sense, the source. So that's one thing. And then I think his ethical perspective has the problem that it's based on envy. It's not based on a healthy self-regard among all classes of society that's so characteristic of a really liberal society. When Tocqueville went to the United States in the early 1830s, he was a French aristocrat. But he was a liberal. And he was very struck by how Americans, now understand this is a slave society we're talking about, but free Americans treated him or anyone else as equal. He noticed this very strongly, that it wasn't sort of curtsying or doffing your hat. It's called taking off your hat to the noble lord and, oh, you're superior to me. Oh, no. It was quite plain to him that Americans regarded themselves as equal in dignity. And that idea, though poorly implemented in the United States, women had few rights, slaves had none. Nonetheless, is what's important. Not saying, oh, those people have more money than I do. The problem with equality as a purpose, it makes perfect sense among friends. It makes perfect sense in a family. A family is a socialist enterprise and should be. But in what Hayek called the Great Society, it makes no sense at all. Maradona was better at football than anyone in this room, I take it. So, how are we going to achieve equality? Well, let's take Maradona in his prime and cripple him. So there's equality. There are many people in this room much smarter than I am. A couple of them are here. How are we going to make them as stupid as I am? Drive nails into their head until their brain works and they're as stupid as I am. That would be equality. So it's plain to me that equality is not the point. In fact, diversity of income too, but of all things, is the basis for trade and the basis for intellectual improvement, for scientific improvement. Our conversation improves my science. Now, what's the second question?
So you mentioned diversity and women, so that's related to my second question. There is the topic of gender identity or gender equality, and there are many people claiming that there's a gender ideology and there's a lobby of lesbian, gay, transsexual, etc. that is part of a cultural Marxist attack on the capitalist institutions. So
by accident, that's true. But it doesn't.
So I would like you to elaborate on the
but it
point
doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason why my feminism, which has been strong, and before I was a woman, I was a feminist. My friends in feminist economics were very pleased that there was a man who was in favor of feminist economics, which is a movement in economics. And then I became a woman, and they said, "Oh, Jesus, another woman who." So they were very it's kind of a joke, but they somewhat felt that way. No, I don't. There's no necessary connection between. Well, look, the key point as a liberal, I need to emphasize: I care only about the poor. I am not interested in the rich. They're many of my friends. I'm glad to eat with them because their food is better. That's altogether nice. And as Hayek very interestingly said, the rich are pioneers in consumption. If you think through it, although shocking though it sounds, it's actually true. But okay, so I'm not focused on the rich. I'm focused on the poor. And liberalism is a theory that doesn't make the poor into children, into pets of the educated class. It doesn't make gays or transgender people into objects of pity. makes them into free people.
Okay, you have Gabriel.
Yes. May I ask you two questions? The first one is, do you have an opinion about the future of Austrian economics, especially in their epistemology point of view?
I'll answer that first. I think it's a dead end in Austrian economics to take the Auburn Austrian view, Hoppe and that gang, because they say we don't need to do science. We already know the answer. And I think that's a mistake. I favor the Austrians of George Mason, who take the view that Austrian economics can be a guide to historical and empirical research. So we learn about the world, we learn about the parameters of the world. So that's my view on Austrian epistemology.
What about your view of Carl's, Polanyi, not Michael, view of the ethics of commerce as something evil?
I have some articles on Karl Polanyi. I call Michael Polanyi, who is a great chemist, just below the level of the Nobel Prize, who spent most of his career in Manchester, though Hungarian. His son actually won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. I call Michael Carl's smarter brother, because I think he was. But, well, let me put it this way. Karl Polanyi got everything about history wrong. He was a journalist, a lawyer. Then he got into economic history. He was a Marxist, especially his wife was a Marxist. She was the founder of the Hungarian Communist Party and the Austrian founder now, his wife, and the Austrian Communist Party, from both of which she was expelled, which I find admirable. Yeah, she obviously was an independent thinker. But anyway, and she couldn't ever join him at Columbia when he got an appointment there, because to the shame of the United States, there was an act called the McCarran Act, which meant that if you were a declared communist, you could not come into the United States. It's outrageous. Anyway, let's get back to the point. So Karl Polanyi was wrong about every single scientific thing, except one, the most important one. He was absolutely correct that the economy is embedded in a society. And that's a very important point, which we of the Chicago School tended to throw away. No, that's not true. Economics is economics. Max U, I call him Max U, as though it was German. Maximize utility subject constraints. That's all you need to know. Whereas the Austrians, and indeed the Marxists, and Karl Polanyi saw the surrounding society in which an economy works as powerful and important.
Okay, I have one more theory
Go.
to check on you. That does not apply to to Europe or China, but to the rest of the world.
Yes.
And that is the one on legal origins.
Legal origins.
Yeah, having inherited the system of the common law or the codified law or continental law.
That's North. And it's rubbish. I mean, surely it is. I mean, come on. Look, there actually a more important example is not Doug, but this argument about the Arab world and about the. I'm not sure how far it extends, but certainly the Arab world and maybe even the Muslim world. Let's talk about the Arab world. The claim is that Muslim law, as developed in the European Middle Ages, was a constraint on economic growth. You think, oh, that's interesting. It's a part of the neo-institutionalist claim, and people like Quran, who's a not Koran, but Quran, who's a Turk and who teaches at Duke University, is an excellent scholar. This is his argument. And the trouble with it is that when some piece of the law is really inconvenient for the bourgeoisie, they change it. They can change it by themselves. For example, commercial law in Europe developed among the merchants themselves and had nothing to do with the state of any sort, with the local lord or anything else. It was what they decided for the Champagne fairs or something. It's not about the Duke. They just made their own little laws, as people do on the gold fields of California in 1849. No one would take the job of being the policeman or the judge because they all wanted to mine gold. So you couldn't, the state would hire someone to go and be the judge to decide on claims in the gold fields. And the judge would go there and say, wait a second, this is crappy. I'm being paid this low salary. I'm going to go mine gold. And they all did. So all they had were gold miners. And the gold miners, this has been carefully documented, made their own law. So that's one problem. And the other problem is that in the Arab world, say Egypt, they adopted French corporate law, Egypt did, in the middle of the 19th century, and nothing happened. Whoops. I thought it was the inconveniences of the Arab world's interpretation of collective enterprises that was the obstacle to growth. You took away that, oh, that's funny, nothing happens. So I think the whole theory is very dubious. I don't think that by the way, common law is much more common than people think. It's not just English.
Okay.
Yes, I think that one of the very strong points of your books, not this presentation you have the screen or on this topic, is perhaps you see the relationship and of the philosophical tradition as an explanation of economic ideas and political ideas. This is in your books.
Well, as he says, it goes back to
the but you have to speak today on this issue. Because I think that it's very poor the reconstruction of economic historians, even today, on political ideas, because they are underestimating the importance of the philosophical tradition. Can you explain, for example, the modern idea of autonomy without a serious account on the idea of human dignity?
I know that
is coming from the philosophical tradition.
It is.
It's very strong, but it's not in the reconstruction of the liberal ideas about ideas.
It is. I had an interesting debate with Barry Weingast, now at Stanford, who was at Washington University in St. Louis with Doug North, and they were the pioneers of this neo-institutionalism. And Barry wrote a comment for that famous journal, the Scandinavian Journal Economic History Review, which no one ever reads. A comment on a paper of mine where I was kind of summarizing this book, which was the more economic of the three. And I was invited to write a reply. And Barry started his comment by saying, yes, Deirdre is correct. Liberalism is really important and is under the idea of liberalism coming from these theoreticians like John Locke and Voltaire is not really a theoretician, but an observer, and from Adam Smith and Hume and so forth. He said, yes, ideas are underestimated. And this idea in particular, the idea of a free society, no slaves. But the trouble is that his theory attempts to be materialist. And actually, the book that Barry Weingast and North and John Wallace wrote, which I'm so ashamed of this. I said to Barry's face, without recognizing him, I said, is the second worst academic book that I've read in 30 years. And I've been apologizing ever since. It was a vulgar and stupid remark. Unfortunately, it's my opinion. In that book, when they're trying to explain the change or the transition between closed order societies, as they call them, and open order societies, you take a look at the book, page 162 or something, they suddenly become rhetorical. They suddenly start talking about ideas, even philosophical ideas. And then very quickly they get back to material conditions. They think they have a material explanation, but they don't. So, it's the old story. Those who don't have an explicit philosophy are condemned to repeat the errors of philosophy.
And a very short term.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Development.
Yeah, and then they immediately go back to sort of a quasi-Marxism. And I think that ideas are just important. And in fact, ideas of a kind of technical sort, steam engines and so on, are obviously important. And then what supports those? An idea about ideas, an idea about freedom. Look, I often say to my socialist friends, would you like rock music to be centrally planned?
The first time I read your famous book, The Rhetoric of Economics, I had the idea that you were doing in philosophy of economics the same that Paul Feyerabend was doing in philosophy of science.
Who was?
Paul Feyerabend.
Yes.
And was your idea too? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Paul Feyerabend is a great philosopher of science.
But sorry, I ask again, but your famous book, The Rhetoric of Economics.
The Rhetoric of Economics was influenced by Paul Feyerabend.
Okay.
Indeed, there's a subsequent book that's still more clearly influenced by him, which is my most philosophical book, called Knowledge and Persuasion in Economics, 1994. And it's kind of an answer to the conventional philosophers of economics like Uskali-Maki, conventional to this day. Uskali has never gotten over it. And it praises Paul Feyerabend, praises Richard Rorty, it praises Hilary Putnam, in that they regard epistemology as an ethical enterprise, not as a mechanical enterprise, where you test against some philosopher's stone what truth is. That was Francis Bacon's problem. No, you can't. There's no such philosopher's stone. We have human argument, the conversation of humankind, and that depends on ethics. So, for example, I was also a fan of Habermas. I can only read one of his books because they're just terribly written. The German must be worse. He gives you a headache to read them. But his basic idea of the ideal speech situation is, I think, very sound and very liberal.
Look at that. One more theory, geography.
Well,
does it have anything to do with?
It's very easy to exaggerate. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Tocqueville. Is it Tocqueville? Who said, yeah, it is Tocqueville. He's talking about the kind of spirit of a liberal society, such as he found in part in the United States. And he was also comparing his own France with England. And he said, if you tell me about the habits of the heart, as he called them, I would say more the habits of the lips of Englishmen or Americans. I don't need to hear about the location of coal deposits and harbors. And I think that's probably right. Speaking of a famous harbor, Hong Kong had no natural resources at all except a good deepwater port. Yet it starts in 1947 with a Somalian standard of living equal to that of the mainland. And despite enormous migration from the mainland, it's actually quite a large country now, though small country, call it country with quotation marks. Its income is almost equal to that income per head to that of the United States. It's these ideas, it's this ideology, it's leaving people alone. And these people, the Hong Kongians, had no political rights at all under the empire, under the British Empire. So geography matters, but it's so easy to overcome it. Coal. The Chinese had coal. They were using coal long before the Europeans were making, for example, porcelain. And they got their coal from Manchuria. If you have the Grand Canal and shipping, you can get coal in southern China. London didn't have any coal, but it's got its coal from the northeast. That's why they called it sea coal. It came by sea. And London was heated in the winter, really from the 16th, early 16th century on. In fact, earlier than that, more like the 15th century, all by coal, which is why it was so dirty. So, the location of resources, whether you have good ports or not, that's nice. I'm not against it, but it's not dispositive.
And geography has an impact in culture. The argument that in the cold areas you need to be more working spirit, more effort.
That I find obnoxious. Speaking of the Auburn School, Hans Hermann Hoppe has just written a book saying that.
Really?
Yeah, and it's really nuts. The idea that only Northern Europeans work hard is lunacy, and is fascist, racist lunacy.
Okay, we have another question here. And we are what? Last one?
No, it's just we are in a way of rethinking, strategically rethinking our university.
Yes.
At this time. Can you give us some advice on our mission and vision today to a young university very strong in humanity?
I've been here for 2 hours.
2 hours. No, 1 word.
And I'm an expert on your
What
university.
is the essence of idea? What would you say to a group of people like us?
Well, I think you could take a page from the Francisco Marroquin University in Guatemala, which has been, I think, a great success. That's how to do it. Hire people who are better than you are. That's the biggest problem in universities. That people hire people who are worse than they are, because that makes them feel good. And you gotta hire smarter people than you are. And it's so tempting to say, oh, well, he's very nice and he brings coffee to me. This man is really a very good person. Let's promote him to full professor. Please don't do it.
Digo algo
Iván,
que
adelante.
olvidé al principio. Agradecer porque esta es una audiencia, digamos, calificada. Realmente tenemos grandes académicos, profesores, estudiantes. grandes académicos liberales. Hemos invitado a no liberales, pero bueno, se ve que prefirieron lavar el auto, así que se lo perdieron. Nuevamente agradecer a Rafael por la excelente contribución acá. Martín, Krause, un lujo como siempre. Deirdre, thank you very much. It was awesome to have you here. Great insights. I think all of them are very happy to have the possibility to listen to you.
Thank you. And I have a gift for you. I want to give you this for the purposes of the university.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.